My name is Sarah Martinez, and 8 months ago, my entire world shifted when I discovered I had won $63 million in the lottery. But instead of celebrating, instead of telling my family, instead of sharing this life-changing news with the people who raised me, I made a decision that would expose the true nature of every relationship I held dear. I decided to fake losing everything in a devastating legal battle to test my family's character. What happened next shattered every illusion I had about the people I called family, but it also led to the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from, and if you're ready for a story about family loyalty, betrayal, and the ultimate test of character. Hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see your own relationships forever. Before I tell you about that devastating discovery, let me paint you a picture of my life before everything changed. I am 31 years old, working as a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm in Denver, making about $55,000 a year. Not rich, not poor, just comfortable enough to live in my modest one-bedroom apartment and drive my 7-year-old Honda Civic without constantly worrying about money. My family was what you'd call solidly middle class, the kind of people who clipped coupons not because they had to, but because it was the responsible thing to do. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, owned a small hardware store in our hometown of Millfield, about 2 hours outside Denver. They worked 6 days a week and brought home around $70,000 a year combined, enough to own their modest 3-bedroom house and take a camping vacation each summer. My older brother Michael was in his final year of medical residency, making about $50,000 while drowning in $200,000 of student loan debt. He lived in a tiny studio apartment and survived on ramen noodles and the occasional care package from mom, but he wore his future doctor status like a badge of honor. Michael had always been the golden child, the one who was going to make something of himself. Then there was my younger sister Victoria, 28, who had married her college boyfriend Kevin 3 years ago. Kevin worked as an accountant for a small firm, and together they made around $85,000 a year. They had a modest house in the suburbs and 2 young kids, Emma and Tyler, ages 4 and 6. Victoria had always been the smart one who made good choices, according to our parents. And then there was me. The one who was just getting by. The one who needed to save more. The one who made questionable decisions. This label had followed me my entire adult life, especially after my divorce 2 years earlier. My ex-husband James had been charming and ambitious when we met, but those qualities masked a gambling addiction that I didn't discover until I found $30,000 missing from our joint savings account. When I filed for divorce, my family's reaction wasn't sympathy or support. Instead, I heard lectures about choosing better men and not recognizing red flags. My father actually said, maybe if you'd paid more attention to his financial habits instead of just falling for a pretty face, you wouldn't be in this mess. The divorce was expensive. I spent $8,000 on a lawyer that my family criticized as too expensive, even though she successfully protected my 401k and got me out of the marriage debt-free. For months afterward, family gatherings included comments about my poor judgment and suggestions that I learn from this experience. My extended family followed the same pattern. My Aunt Carmen, who worked as a nurse, my Uncle Tony, who taught high school, my cousin Miguel, who managed a local restaurant, they were all good people living modest lives, but they also shared the family trait of being incredibly judgmental about money decisions. The only person who never made me feel like a failure was my grandmother, Rosa Martinez. Grandma Rose, as we all called her, had lived through the Great Depression and understood that sometimes life just hits you hard regardless of how well you plan. She was the only one who would slip me a $50 or $100 bill when times were tough, always with a wink and a whisper of "Don't tell your parents, Mija. This is between us." Grandma Rose had passed away 6 months before my lottery win, and I missed her wisdom more than I could express. She was the one person who had always believed in me, who had always seen my worth beyond my bank account balance. My relationship with money had always been complicated because of my family's constant commentary. I wasn't irresponsible, despite what they seemed to think. I had a small emergency fund. I contributed to my 401k. I paid all my bills on time. But I also believed in enjoying life a little. I'd take an occasional weekend trip, buy a nice bottle of wine for special occasions, get my hair done at a salon instead of a budget chain. These choices were apparently evidence of my poor financial planning. The irony was that while my family constantly lectured me about money, I was actually more financially stable than some of them realized. I had managed to save $15,000 in my emergency fund, had no credit card debt, and was even ahead on my car payments. But because I wasn't obsessively penny pinching like they thought I should be, I was labeled as financially irresponsible. This dynamic had created a pattern where I felt constantly defensive about my choices and increasingly distant from my family. Family gatherings became exercises in deflecting comments about my lifestyle, my apartment, my car, my career trajectory. Everything was always framed as advice, but it felt like judgment. Looking back now, I realize that my family's obsession with my financial choices had less to do with genuine concern and more to do with their own insecurities about money. By focusing on my supposed shortcomings, they could avoid examining their own financial anxieties and limitations. Work wasn't much better. My boss, Patricia, had a habit of micromanaging my projects while taking credit for successful campaigns. My colleague Derek consistently missed deadlines, leaving me to cover his work, yet somehow he was always in consideration for promotions I deserved. I kept my head down and did excellent work, hoping it would eventually pay off, but the recognition never came. My one indulgence, the thing my family loved to mock, was playing the lottery. Every Friday, I would stop at Garcia's Corner Market and buy 2 tickets, using the same numbers every time: 3, 16, 23, 31, 42, and 7. These were meaningful numbers to me. Grandma Rose's birthday, my parents' anniversary, Michael's birthday, Victoria's birthday, and the day Grandma Rose had taught me to play poker when I was 7. My family thought this was the height of financial stupidity. "You might as well just burn $10 every week," my father would say. Victoria would roll her eyes and comment, "That's $520 a year you could put in savings." Michael, despite his own student loan debt, would lecture me about probability and expected returns. But there was something hopeful about those tickets, something that represented possibility and dreams. Grandma Rose had always said, "You can't win if you don't play, Mija. Sometimes you have to believe in magic." She was the only one who understood that the $2 I spent wasn't about expecting to win, it was about holding on to hope. I had dreams that seemed increasingly distant as I approached my 30s. I wanted to travel, to see places beyond the Colorado mountains I'd grown up with. I wanted to go back to school and get my master's degree in something I was passionate about, maybe art history or creative writing. I wanted to own a home with a garden where I could grow the vegetables Grandma Rose had taught me to love. I wanted enough financial security that an unexpected car repair wouldn't require careful budget planning. These dreams felt achievable but distant. I was making progress, slowly but surely, but every family gathering reminded me that my progress wasn't fast enough, wasn't impressive enough, wasn't worthy of respect or admiration. This was my life 8 months ago, ordinary, sometimes frustrating, occasionally lonely, but stable and moving forward on my own terms. I had no idea that a single piece of paper was about to change everything and give me the power to reveal the true character of everyone I thought I knew. The day that changed everything was a Saturday in March. I had spent the morning going through Grandma Rose's belongings, a task I'd been avoiding since her funeral. My parents had asked me to handle it because they were busy with the hardware store, and, honestly, I think they knew how much her things meant to me. Her small apartment was filled with memories, hand-knitted blankets, photographs spanning decades, recipe cards written in her careful handwriting, and books with margins full of her thoughtful notes. As I was going through her bedroom dresser, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were lottery tickets, dozens of them, dating back years. At the bottom was a note in her handwriting, "For Sarah, my lucky granddaughter. Keep playing our numbers. Abuela believes in magic." I sat on her bed and cried, holding that note and realizing she had been playing the same numbers I played, probably hoping we'd win together someday. That afternoon, I stopped at Garcia's corner market as usual, but this time I felt like I was carrying Grandma Rose with me. "The usual, Sarah?" asked Carlos, who had owned the store for 20 years and knew all his regular customers. "Yes, but make it 3 tickets today," I said, handing him $6 instead of 4. "1 for me and 2 for Grandma Rose." He smiled knowingly. Carlos had always liked my grandmother, who had shopped there for years. She was a good woman. May she rest in peace. I took the tickets home and put them on my kitchen counter, next to a framed photo of Grandma Rose and me from last Christmas. That evening, I ordered Chinese takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and settled in to watch a movie. The lottery drawing was at 8 p.m., but I barely paid attention. I had been playing these numbers for 5 years and had never won more than $20. At 8:30, during a commercial break, I lazily picked up my phone to check the numbers. I pulled up the lottery website and looked at the winning numbers: 3, 16, 23, 31, 42, 7. I stared at the screen for a full minute before it registered. Those were my numbers. Our numbers. Grandma Rose's numbers. My hands started shaking as I picked up the first ticket. 3, 16, 23, 31, 42, 7. I checked it again. And again. I grabbed the second ticket. Different numbers, not a winner. The third ticket. Also different numbers. But that first ticket. Those 6 perfect numbers that I had been playing for 5 years, that Grandma Rose had been playing even longer. I was holding $63 million in my hand. I called the lottery hotline 3 times to confirm. I checked the website on my laptop, my phone, and my tablet. I even drove to Garcia's corner market and asked Carlos to check the ticket on his machine. Every confirmation was the same. I was the sole winner of $63 million. After taxes, it would be approximately $38 million. An amount so large I couldn't even conceptualize it. I had been excited earlier that day about finding a $20 bill in one of Grandma Rose's coat pockets. Now I was holding enough money to buy a house for every person in my family, with millions left over. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that ticket and thinking about Grandma Rose's note about believing in magic. I thought about my family's constant criticism of my lottery playing, their lectures about financial responsibility, their judgment about my poor choices. And somewhere around 3 a.m., an idea began to form. What if I could test their character before they knew about the money? What if I could find out who would truly be there for me when I needed help, without the influence of my sudden wealth? By sunrise, I had made my decision. I would claim the money quietly, secure it safely, and then create a situation where I needed help. Only then would I know who deserved to be part of my new life. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching lottery winners. What I found was both inspiring and terrifying. Stories of families torn apart by greed, friends who became enemies overnight, and winners who ended up more miserable than before they won. One article that stuck with me was titled "The Lottery Curse: Why 70% of Winners Go Broke Within 7 Years." But I also found stories of winners who had used their money wisely, who had maintained their values and relationships, who had made their windfalls into forces for good. The difference seemed to be in how they handled the money and, more importantly, how they handled the people around them. I made an appointment with Philip Hendricks, an attorney who specialized in financial planning and estate law. His office was downtown, in a building that screamed expensive, and as I sat in the waiting room clutching my purse with the winning ticket inside, I felt completely out of place. "Ms. Martinez," Philip greeted me, extending his hand. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of confident demeanor that comes from dealing with significant wealth. "What can I help you with today?" I placed the ticket on his mahogany desk. "I need to claim this without anyone knowing it was me." His eyebrows raised slightly as he examined the ticket, but his expression remained professional. "I see. Well, you've come to the right place." Colorado allows lottery winners to claim prizes through legal entities that protect their identities. Over the next 2 hours, Philip explained the process of setting up a blind trust, how taxes would work, and the importance of building a team of financial advisors to manage such a large sum. The biggest mistake winners make, he told me, is telling too many people too quickly. Once that information is out there, there's no putting it back. I nodded, thinking about my family's reaction to me spending $4 a week on lottery tickets. I want to do this right. I don't want this money to ruin my relationships. Smart thinking, Philip said. May I ask what your plans are for the immediate future? I took a deep breath. I want to test some relationships first. Before anyone knows about the money, I want to see who would really be there for me if I needed help. Philip leaned back in his chair. That's actually quite wise. Money has a way of revealing people's true character, but it can also mask it. Testing relationships before wealth enters the equation could save you a lot of heartache later. We spent the following week setting up the legal structure. The Liberty Financial Trust was established to claim the winnings, honoring my grandmother's memory while protecting my identity. The money was placed in a diversified investment portfolio that would ensure I'd never have to worry about finances again, even if I lived to be 100. During this process, I also took extended leave from my job, citing stress and the need to handle family matters after my grandmother's death. Patricia was surprisingly understanding, probably because she assumed I'd be dealing with a modest inheritance rather than planning the biggest financial test of my life. As the trust was finalized and the money secured, I began planning my test. It needed to be believable, significant enough to require real sacrifice from my family, but not so dramatic that it would invite too much scrutiny or interference. I decided on a legal crisis. I would claim that my ex-husband James had hidden assets during our divorce, that new evidence had come to light, and that I needed to go back to court to protect myself from his fraudulent claims. Legal battles were notoriously expensive and unpredictable, which would explain large financial needs. They were also complex enough that my family wouldn't be able to easily verify details or interfere with the process. The beautiful part of this plan was that it played directly into my family's existing narrative about my poor judgment in men. They would see this crisis as a natural consequence of my divorce, something that proved their point about my decision-making while also creating an opportunity for them to show genuine support. I spent days crafting the perfect story. James had apparently hidden business interests and investments during our divorce. A former business partner had come forward with evidence that James owed me a significant settlement, but he was fighting it and had hired an expensive legal team. I needed money for attorney fees, court costs, and living expenses while the case played out. The amounts I would request were carefully calculated to be significant for middle-class families, but not impossibly large. $1,200 for immediate rent to avoid eviction. $3,500 for attorney retainer fees. $800 per month for living expenses during the legal process. These were the kinds of numbers that would require sacrifice from my family, but weren't beyond their means if they truly wanted to help. I created a timeline that would allow me to test each family member individually, documenting their responses and willingness to help. I also researched local attorneys and court procedures so I could answer basic questions without obvious inconsistencies. As I finalized my plan, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. I was about to learn something profound about the people I loved most, and I suspected not all of those lessons would be pleasant. But I thought about Grandma Rose's note about believing in magic, and I realized that sometimes magic isn't just about good things happening to you. Sometimes it's about having the power to see truth clearly, even when that truth is painful. The level of psychological planning Sarah put into this test will blow your mind. Before we continue, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from around the world, and if you're invested in this revenge story, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more incredible family drama stories. I decided to start with my parents, figuring their response would set the tone for how the rest of the family would react. On a Tuesday evening, I called them at home, knowing they'd be settled in for the night after closing the hardware store. "Hi, Mom," I said, making sure my voice carried the right mixture of stress and exhaustion. "Sarah, honey, you sound upset. Is everything okay?" I launched into my carefully prepared story. I told them about James's former business partner coming forward with evidence of hidden assets, about discovering that my ex-husband had essentially stolen money that should have been part of our divorce settlement, and about needing to go back to court to fight for what was rightfully mine. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice immediately filled with concern. "That sounds terrible. How much are we talking about?" "The attorney thinks I could be entitled to around $45,000, I said, "but James is fighting it with his own lawyer, and the legal fees are going to be expensive." My father had been quiet during the conversation, but now he spoke up. "Sarah, this is exactly why I told you to be more careful during the divorce process. A good attorney would have found these assets the first time around." I felt the familiar sting of his criticism, but I pressed on. "Dad, that's not helpful right now. The point is, I have a chance to recover money that James hid from me, but I need help with the legal costs." "How much help?" my mother asked. "I need $1,200 immediately for rent, or I'll face eviction next week. And $3,500 for the attorney retainer to get the process started." There was a long pause. I could hear my parents whispering to each other, though I couldn't make out the words. "Honey," my mother finally said, "you know we'd love to help, but things have been really tight at the store. The big box hardware store opened up outside of town last year, and our sales have dropped significantly." My father chimed in, "We're behind on our own bills, Sarah. We had to take out a loan against the store just to make payroll last month." "What about a small amount?" I asked. "Even $500 would help with groceries and utilities." "Let us see what we can do," my mother said. "But have you talked to Michael or Victoria?" "Michael will be making good money soon as a doctor, and Victoria and Kevin have steady jobs." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling the first sting of disappointment. My parents, who had lectured me about emergency funds my entire adult life, claimed they couldn't spare $500 to help their daughter avoid eviction. Whether their financial struggles were real or not, the speed with which they directed me to my siblings spoke volumes. The next day, I called Michael during his lunch break at the hospital. "Sarah, I literally have 15 minutes to eat," he said when he answered. "What's up?" I explained the situation, watching the clock and trying to convey urgency without seeming dramatic. "Wow, that's really messed up," Michael said. "James always seemed sketchy to me. I'm not surprised he was hiding money." "I need help with the legal fees," I said directly. "I know you're in residency and money is tight, but I'm facing eviction and I need an attorney retainer." "How much are we talking about?" $1,200 for rent and $3,500 for the lawyer." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I'm drowning in student loans. I literally have $200 in my checking account, and that has to last me 2 weeks. I'm eating hospital cafeteria food and living in a studio apartment with a roommate. What about something smaller? Even $300 would help." "I wish I could, but I honestly don't have it." "Have you talked to Victoria?" "Kevin makes decent money as an accountant." After hanging up with Michael, I felt the second wave of disappointment mixed with understanding. His financial situation was genuinely challenging, but the immediate deflection to Victoria stung. That evening, I called Victoria while she was making dinner for her family. "Sarah, can this wait? I'm trying to get the kids fed and bathed before Kevin gets home." "It's kind of urgent," I said, and explained the situation while listening to her children arguing in the background. "That's awful," Victoria said, though she sounded distracted. "Hold on. Emma, stop pulling Tyler's hair. Tyler, eat your vegetables." "Victoria, I need help with legal fees and rent. I'm facing eviction." "How much?" she asked, and I could hear her attention sharpen. $1,200 for rent and $3,500 for the attorney. There was a pause, filled with the sounds of her domestic life. "Sarah, that's a lot of money. Kevin and I just had to replace the furnace, and Emma needs orthodontics. Plus, we're trying to save for Tyler's preschool." "What about a smaller amount?" "I'm desperate here. Let me talk to Kevin tonight and see what we can do. But honestly, we're pretty stretched thin. Have you considered downsizing your apartment? Maybe moving somewhere cheaper?" The suggestion that I should uproot my life rather than receive temporary help from my financially stable sister was like a slap in the face. Over the next few days, I reached out to my extended family. My Aunt Carmen, who worked as a nurse, expressed sympathy but mentioned her own mortgage struggles. My Uncle Tony cited his teacher's salary and his own kids' college expenses. My cousin Miguel talked about the restaurant business being unpredictable and his own recent car troubles. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial concern, followed by explanations of their own financial constraints, followed by suggestions that I contact someone else who might be in a better position to help. What hurt most wasn't necessarily their inability to help, but the speed with which each person deflected responsibility to someone else. Nobody offered to sacrifice their own comfort, even temporarily, to help me avoid homelessness. As the week progressed, I noticed other troubling patterns. When I called Victoria to follow up, she mentioned that she'd talked to our mother about my situation. When I called my mother, she mentioned that Michael had also called her. They were all talking to each other about my crisis, but none of them were talking to me about concrete help. I also started seeing subtle changes in their social media posts. Victoria posted about teaching children financial responsibility and the importance of emergency funds. My father shared an article about enabling adult children and tough love parenting. These passive-aggressive messages felt like public commentary on my private crisis. The most painful realization was that my family seemed more interested in being right about my supposed financial irresponsibility than in helping me avoid the consequences of a crisis that wasn't actually my fault. By the end of the first week, I had received exactly $0 in help from my family. I had received multiple lectures about better planning, several suggestions that I downsize my life, and countless redirections to other family members who might be able to help. But I had also received something unexpected: genuine offers of help from people outside my family. As my family continued to find reasons why they couldn't help, I was shocked to discover genuine support coming from unexpected sources. Marcus Rodriguez was the security guard in my apartment building, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who worked nights and took online college courses during the day to finish his degree. When he noticed me sitting in the lobby one evening, clearly upset after another disappointing phone call with family, he asked if I was okay. I found myself telling him about my legal crisis, about facing eviction, about my family's inability to help. Marcus listened without judgment, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. "You know," he said finally, "I've got about $400 in my emergency fund. It's not much, but if it would help with groceries or utilities while you figure out the bigger stuff, you're welcome to it." I was stunned. This man, who made maybe $12 an hour and was putting himself through school, was offering me his emergency savings. I tried to decline, but he insisted. "My daughter went through something similar with her ex-husband," Marcus explained. "Nobody should have to face legal battles alone. Family is supposed to be there for each other, but sometimes family is the people who show up, not the people who share your blood." Around the same time, my former coworker Linda Chin reached out. We had stayed in touch after she left our marketing firm for a better position, and when she heard about my situation through mutual friends, she organized a collection at her new office. "It's not much," Linda said when she handed me an envelope containing $650 in cash, but the whole office contributed. "We've all dealt with ex-husband drama, and we know how expensive legal fights can be." I was overwhelmed by the generosity of people who barely knew me, who had no obligation to help, who were offering support without judgment or conditions. But the most touching gesture came from my elderly neighbor, David Patterson. David was 78 years old, lived alone since his wife passed away 2 years earlier, and survived on Social Security and a small pension. When he heard about my situation, I'm still not sure how, he knocked on my door one evening carrying a small jewelry box. "These were my wife Martha's," he said, opening the box to reveal a collection of modest but beautiful pieces: a wedding ring, a pair of pearl earrings, a gold bracelet, and a small diamond pendant. She always said jewelry was meant to help people through hard times. "I think she'd want you to have these to sell if it would help." I started crying right there in my doorway. This man, living on a fixed income, was offering me his most precious possessions to help with my legal bills. "Mr. Patterson, I can't take these. They're your memories of your wife." "Honey," he said gently, "memories are in here." He pointed to his heart, not in things. Martha would be furious with me if I held on to jewelry while a young woman faced homelessness. "These pieces are worth maybe $800 to a pawn shop. That might not solve your problems, but it could buy you some time." The contrast between my family's responses and these strangers' generosity was becoming impossible to ignore. People with very little were offering me everything they could spare, while my family members with comfortable incomes found reasons why they couldn't help. Meanwhile, I was escalating the financial pressure to test my family further. I called my parents with an update that my landlord had served an official eviction notice and that I needed $2,800 immediately or I would be homeless within 5 days. "Oh no, Sarah," my mother said, "this is getting serious. Have you considered calling a homeless shelter to see what your options are?" The suggestion that I should prepare for homelessness rather than receive help from my parents who own their own home and business was breathtaking in its callousness. "Mom, I'm asking my family for help before I end up on the street." "Honey, we just don't have that kind of money. The store is barely breaking even. Maybe you could stay with Victoria temporarily." When I called Victoria about temporary housing, she hesitated. "Sarah, our guest room is full of storage right now, and with the kids' schedules, it would be really disruptive. Maybe you could find a room to rent somewhere cheaper." I also created a new crisis. The legal discovery process had revealed additional hidden assets, but pursuing them would require an additional $4,000 in attorney fees. This was my family's chance to step up for the larger prize, to see the potential return on investment. Michael's response was to suggest I find a lawyer who would work on contingency. If the case is so strong, any lawyer should be willing to take it for a percentage of the settlement. Victoria suggested I take out a loan against my car. "You could probably get $3,000 or $4,000 and then pay it back when you win the case." My parents suggested I consider bankruptcy as an alternative to fighting the legal battle. "Sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses," my father said. Each suggestion was designed to solve my problem without requiring any sacrifice from them. They wanted me to exhaust every other option before they would consider dipping into their own resources. But the most hurtful discovery came when I learned about their private discussions. My cousin Miguel accidentally revealed that the family had been having group text conversations about my situation. When I pressed him for details, he got uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but he let slip that there had been discussions about my pattern of poor decisions and whether helping me would just be enabling. I realized that while I was facing potential homelessness, my family was having philosophical discussions about tough love and personal responsibility. They were more concerned with being right about my supposed character flaws than with preventing my suffering. The contrast with my non-family supporters couldn't have been more stark. Marcus checked on me daily and offered to help me move if I couldn't save my apartment. Linda was researching low-cost legal aid options and had connected me with a lawyer who might take my case pro bono. David had insisted I take his wife's jewelry and refused to accept any promises of repayment. These people, who had no obligation to care about me, were treating my crisis as their problem to solve. Meanwhile, my family, who claimed to love me, were treating my crisis as my problem to learn from. As I entered the 3rd week of my test, I was no longer hoping my family would step up with financial help. I was documenting their responses for a different purpose entirely. Every deflection, every lecture, every suggestion that I should lower my standards rather than receive their support was evidence of their true character. Share this video with someone who needs to see how families can abandon you when money gets tight. Wait until you hear what Sarah's family said about her behind her back in their group text messages. The responses will make your blood boil. If you're feeling this story, hit that like button and share this with someone who has ever been let down by their family during a crisis. 3 weeks into my manufactured crisis, with my family having failed every test of loyalty and support, I decided to try one final experiment. I would dangle the possibility of financial gain and see how quickly their behavior changed. I called my mother on a Thursday evening, timing the call for when both my parents would be home and could hear the conversation on speaker. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I said, adding a note of resigned exhaustion to my voice. "I've been going through Grandma Rose's papers for the estate, and I found some things I didn't know about." "What kind of things, honey?" "She had a savings account that nobody knew about. About $5,000. And there's a life insurance policy that I'm the beneficiary on. It's not huge, but it's $15,000. I could practically hear the mental calculations happening on the other end of the phone. "That's wonderful, Sarah," my father said. That should help with your legal fees. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. The life insurance won't pay out for another month because of the paperwork, and the savings account is tied up in probate. But knowing I'll have that money soon, I'm thinking about just cashing out my 401k to handle the legal fees now. This was the bait. My family had always lectured me about the importance of retirement savings. If they truly cared about my financial future, they would offer to front me the money rather than let me destroy my retirement fund with penalties and taxes. Oh, Sarah, my mother said, you shouldn't touch your retirement money. The penalties alone would cost you thousands. I know, but what choice do I have? I can't wait a month for the insurance money, and I need $4,000 for the next phase of the legal case. There was a pause. Then my father spoke up, maybe we could work something out. When you get the insurance money, you could pay us back. I felt a cold realization wash over me. They had just spent 3 weeks claiming they couldn't spare money to help me, but suddenly, when there was a guaranteed repayment plan with my inheritance money, they were willing to help. That would be amazing, I said. So you could loan me the $4,000? Well, my mother said carefully, we'd need to work out the details. Maybe we could do $2,000 now, and you could find the other $2,000 somewhere else. Even with guaranteed repayment from my inheritance, they were still trying to minimize their involvement. Over the next few days, I had similar conversations with Michael and Victoria. Both suddenly became much more interested in helping once they learned about the insurance money. Michael offered to loan me $1,500 against the inheritance, but wanted the arrangement in writing. Victoria suggested I could stay in their guest room after all, but mentioned that $15,000 could probably cover a storage unit for their extra belongings. The most revealing conversation came with my Aunt Carmen, who called me after hearing about the inheritance through the family grapevine. Sarah, I heard about your grandmother's insurance policy. What a blessing during this difficult time. Yes, it'll help once it comes through. I was thinking about your situation, and I might be able to help with a small loan now that I know you'll be able to pay it back. Maybe $800 or $1,000. This was the same aunt who, 2 weeks earlier, had claimed she couldn't spare $200 because of her own mortgage struggles. But the real revelation came when I accidentally discovered the family group text chain. My cousin Miguel had included me in a different group message by mistake, and when I scrolled up to understand the context, I found something that made my blood run cold. The messages were from a group called Sarah's Situation and included my parents, siblings, and several aunts and uncles. As I read through the chain, I discovered that my family had been coordinating their responses to my crisis from the beginning. Don't offer more than $500, my father had written. If we all give her a little, she'll keep coming back for more. I agree, Victoria had responded. She needs to learn to handle her own problems. Michael had added, I think this is what she gets for not saving properly. Maybe hitting rock bottom will motivate her to make better choices. But the messages from after they learned about the inheritance were even worse. $15,000 changes things, my mother had written. If she can pay us back with interest, we should help her. We should figure out what percentage of the $15,000 each of us should get for helping, Victoria had added. She owes us for all the emotional support we've given her, my Aunt Carmen had written. I screenshot every single message, my hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. These people hadn't just refused to help me during a crisis. They had actively coordinated their abandonment and were now planning to profit from my inheritance. The text chain revealed that they saw my crisis not as a daughter's, sister's, or niece's emergency, but as a lesson I needed to learn. They had collectively decided to let me face potential homelessness because they believed I deserved it. But they were also willing to help if there was guaranteed profit involved. I realized I was looking at the written evidence of my family's true character. When they thought I had nothing to offer them, I wasn't worth their sacrifice. When they thought I might have money they could access, I suddenly became worthy of their attention. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of the most painful discovery of my life. I had $38 million in the bank, but I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I also felt something else, a burning desire to show them exactly who they really were. I called Philip Hendricks the next morning. Philip, it's time for phase 2 of my plan. What did you have in mind, Sarah? I want to give them exactly what they deserve. And I want to make sure they understand the cost of their choices. What about the people who did help you? I smiled for the first time in weeks. They're going to discover what real family loyalty looks like. I planned the revelation carefully, choosing a Saturday afternoon when I could gather my entire family under the pretense of a family meeting about my legal situation. I told them I had important updates about the case and needed their advice about some difficult decisions. My parents' house seemed smaller than I remembered as I watched my family file in. Michael arrived first, looking harried from his hospital schedule. Victoria came with Kevin, who was carrying Tyler while Emma clung to his leg. My aunts and uncles filled out the living room, creating a crowd that would have felt warm and supportive under different circumstances. Instead, I felt like I was looking at strangers. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing in front of the fireplace where family photos documented decades of holidays, birthdays, and graduations. "I know you're all concerned about my legal situation and my financial problems." Nods and murmurs of agreement filled the room. My mother looked appropriately worried. Michael checked his watch. Victoria tried to keep Tyler from knocking over my mother's decorative figurines. "I have some important updates to share with you, but first, I want to acknowledge the people who have really been there for me during this crisis." I gestured toward the back of the room, where Marcus, Linda, and David stood somewhat awkwardly. I had invited them to witness this moment, though they didn't yet understand why. Marcus, my building security guard, offered me his entire emergency fund of $400. Linda, my former coworker, organized a collection at her office and raised $650. And David, my 78-year-old neighbor living on Social Security, gave me his late wife's jewelry to sell so I could pay my legal fees. I watched my family's faces as I continued. These people, who barely know me, who have very little money themselves, offered me everything they could spare. Without conditions. Without lectures. Without judgment. My father shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. Victoria whispered something to Kevin. "Now, I want to share some interesting discoveries I made during this crisis. About my family. About the people who claim to love me." I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots of the family group text. I accidentally discovered that you've all been coordinating your responses to my crisis. You created a group chat called Sarah's Situation to discuss how little help you could get away with giving me. The room went dead silent. I could see recognition and panic on several faces. "Dad," you wrote, and I quote, "don't offer more than $500. If we all give her a little, she'll keep coming back for more." My father's face went red. "Sarah, that's taken out of context." "Michael," I continued, you wrote, "I think this is what she gets for not saving properly. Maybe hitting rock bottom will motivate her to make better choices." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. "Victoria," you wrote, "she needs to learn to handle her own problems." My sister looked like she wanted to disappear. But the most interesting part is what happened when you learned about Grandma Rose's insurance money. Suddenly, you were all willing to help. Not because you cared about me, but because you saw an opportunity to profit. I read more messages. Victoria wrote, "We should figure out what percentage of the $15,000 each of us should get for helping." Aunt Carmen wrote, "She owes us for all the emotional support we've given her." The room was filled with shocked silence and uncomfortable shifting. "You let me believe I might become homeless," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "You watched me struggle with the idea of bankruptcy. You lectured me about poor planning and bad choices. Not because you couldn't help, but because you collectively decided I didn't deserve help." "Sarah," my mother said, her voice shaking, "we were worried about enabling you." "No," I said firmly. "You were worried about yourselves. You were worried about your money, your comfort, your convenience. You treated my crisis like a teaching moment instead of like an emergency." I turned toward Marcus, Linda, and David. These three people understand something you don't. They understand that when someone you care about is in trouble, you help them. Period. You don't calculate what's in it for you. You don't coordinate with others to minimize your sacrifice. You don't wait to see if there's profit involved. I pulled out a folder of documents and set it on the coffee table. Which brings me to my announcement. There is no legal battle with James. There never was. I made up the entire crisis to test your character. to see who would be there for me when I truly needed help. Gasps and angry murmurs filled the room. "You what?" Michael said, standing up. "You lied to us? You manipulated us." "Yes," I said calmly. "I tested you. And you all failed spectacularly." "This is ridiculous," Victoria said. "You can't judge us for not falling for a scam." "It wasn't a scam," I replied. "It was a test of love, loyalty, and character. And the results were very clear." I opened the folder and pulled out bank statements. 8 months ago, I won $63 million in the lottery. The room exploded with shocked voices, but I continued speaking over them. "I have been a multi-millionaire this entire time, watching you refuse to help me avoid homelessness, watching you lecture me about financial responsibility, watching you coordinate your responses to minimize your involvement in my crisis." "You're lying," my father said. I handed the bank statements to my mother, who stared at them with wide eyes before passing them to my father. "While you were deciding I didn't deserve $1,200 to avoid eviction, I had $38 million in investment accounts." I turned back to Marcus, Linda, and David, who were looking just as shocked as my family. "Marcus, you offered me your emergency fund of $400. Here's a check for $50,000. Use it for your education, your family, whatever you need." Marcus stared at the check like he couldn't believe it was real. "Linda, your office collection raised $650 to help a former coworker they barely knew. Here's a check for $40,000. You're also invited to become a partner in the marketing consultancy I'm starting." Linda started crying as she looked at the check. "David, you gave me your wife's jewelry because you thought I needed help more than you needed memories. Here's a check for $60,000. I'm also paying off your mortgage and covering your medical expenses for life." David sat down heavily, overwhelmed. I turned back to my family, who were staring at the checks and bank statements in stunned silence. "This is what real family looks like," I said, gesturing to Marcus, Linda, and David. "People who sacrifice for each other without calculating the cost. People who show up during emergencies instead of coordinating their excuses." "Sarah," my mother said, tears in her eyes, "we didn't know. If we had known you had won the lottery." "That's exactly the point," I said. "You didn't know I had money, so you showed me your true character. You treated me like a burden, like a lesson to be learned, like someone whose problems weren't worth solving." I pulled out more documents. "I've also made some other decisions. I've established the Rosa Martinez Memorial Scholarship Fund, which will provide college funding for students from working families. I've started a foundation that helps elderly people living on fixed incomes. And I've purchased the building next to your hardware store, Dad, where I'm opening a competing business." My father went pale. "Sarah, you can't do that. It'll ruin us. Did you consider that refusing to help me might ruin me?" I asked. "Did you think about the consequences of letting your daughter become homeless?" "This is insane," Michael said. "You're punishing us for not falling for your lies." "I'm not punishing you," I replied. "I'm showing you the consequences of your choices. You chose to prioritize your money over my welfare. You chose to coordinate your abandonment of me. You chose to try to profit from my inheritance." I gathered my documents and moved toward the door. The people who truly cared about me, who sacrificed for me without knowing I could repay them, have been rewarded accordingly. The people who calculated their minimal involvement in my crisis have lost the privilege of being part of my life. "Sarah, wait," Victoria called. "We're your family. We love you." I turned back one last time. Family isn't about shared DNA. It's about shared sacrifice. It's about showing up when someone needs you, not when it's convenient for you. It's about love without conditions. I looked at Marcus, Linda, and David, who were still processing what had just happened. These 3 people understand family better than any of you ever have. If you're loving this ultimate revenge story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because Revenge with Nick has more incredible payback stories coming your way. Also, if this story made you think about your own family relationships, drop a comment about the most disappointing thing a family member has ever done to you. 6 months later, my life looked completely different from that day when I first checked those lottery numbers in Grandma Rosa's apartment. Marcus had used his $50,000 to finish his degree and start a small security consulting business. He hired 3 other veterans and was already expanding. He insisted on paying me back $100 every month, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. "It's not about the money," he explained. "It's about dignity and gratitude." Linda had become my business partner in Martinez Marketing Solutions, and our firm was already securing major clients. Her expertise in digital marketing combined with my financial backing had created something neither of us could have achieved alone. More importantly, she had become one of my closest friends, someone who understood the value of loyalty and trust. David had moved into a beautiful assisted living community where he had made new friends and started a woodworking club. His mortgage was paid off, his medical expenses covered, and he had enough money to travel to see his grandchildren whenever he wanted. Every week, he called to check on me, and every month, he sent me a small wooden gift he'd made in his workshop. My family had tried, repeatedly, to reach out. My mother called weekly, alternating between apologies and anger. My siblings sent long emails explaining their perspective and insisting they had been trying to protect me. My extended family members shared social media posts about forgiveness and the importance of family unity. But I had learned something crucial during my test. Their love had always been conditional. Conditional on me accepting their criticism, their judgment, their minimal involvement in my problems. They loved me when I was the struggling family member who made them feel superior. They didn't know how to love me when I had the power to hold them accountable for their choices. I hadn't completely cut them off, but our relationship had fundamentally changed. I still sent birthday cards and attended major family events, but the pretense of closeness was gone. I no longer sought their approval or acceptance. I no longer pretended that their opinion of my choices mattered. At Christmas, when my mother tried to gift me a set of expensive kitchen knives, I politely declined. "Thank you, but I don't need anything," I said. "Everyone needs good knives," she insisted. "Mom," I said gently, "I needed help 6 months ago. I needed support and understanding and sacrifice from my family. I don't need kitchen knives." The hardware store competition had been effective but not cruel. I didn't try to destroy their business, but I did offer better prices, extended hours, and more personalized service. It forced them to improve their own business practices, and ultimately, the competition benefited the entire community. My foundation work had become the most rewarding part of my new life. The Rosa Martinez Memorial Fund had provided college scholarships to 47 students from working families. Our elderly assistance program had helped over 200 seniors with home repairs, medical expenses, and companionship services. Every decision I made honored Grandma Rose's memory and her understanding that real wealth comes from lifting others up, not from hoarding resources or calculating minimal involvement in other people's problems. I had also started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I approached relationships with new confidence and clarity. I knew my worth wasn't determined by what I could give to others, and I knew that real love showed up during emergencies, not just during celebrations. The lottery money had given me financial freedom, but the test had given me something more valuable, the ability to recognize authentic relationships and the courage to invest my time and energy only in people who deserved it. Some people called my test manipulative. Some said I had been unfair to my family. But I knew the truth. I had simply created a situation where their true character could be revealed. I hadn't forced them to abandon me. I had given them an opportunity to show love and support, and they had chosen to prioritize their own comfort instead. Grandma Rose had always told me that money reveals character, and she was right. My lottery win had revealed that some relationships were worth preserving and nurturing, while others were simply accidents of birth that deserved polite distance rather than emotional investment. As I sit here today, in my beautiful home with its garden full of the vegetables Grandma Rose taught me to grow, I think about that note she left me about believing in magic. She was right about magic, but not in the way I originally thought. The magic wasn't in winning the lottery. The magic was in discovering who deserved a place in my life and who didn't. The magic was in learning that family isn't about blood relations or shared history. It's about people who show up when you need them, who sacrifice without calculating the cost, who love you without conditions. The magic was in finding Marcus, Linda, and David, and in realizing that the best relationships in life are often the ones you choose, not the ones you inherit. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. It shows you who they really are when the stakes matter, when sacrifice is required, when love has a price tag attached. My family taught me a valuable lesson, just not the one they intended. They taught me that some people will only be there for you when it's convenient, when it doesn't cost them anything, when there's something in it for them. But Marcus, Linda, and David taught me a different lesson. They taught me that real love is generous, that real family is chosen, and that the most valuable relationships are built on sacrifice, not on shared genetics. If this story inspired you to think about who would really help you during your darkest moments, drop a comment sharing your experience with loyalty and family. Have you ever had to test someone's character? What did you learn about the people in your life? Don't forget to like this video if you believe Sarah got the justice she deserved, and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories where good people finally get the recognition they deserve. Share this with someone who has ever been disappointed by their family's lack of support. They need to know they're not alone, and that real family is about love in action, not just words. Remember, the people who deserve a place in your life are not those who are there when you have everything to give, but those who stay when you have nothing left to offer but yourself. The most valuable thing I gained from winning $63 million wasn't the money. It was the clarity to recognize authentic love and the courage to build my life around people who understood that real family means showing up, especially when it's difficult, especially when it costs something, especially when no one is watching. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's simply living well and showing people the cost of their choices through the contrast of what they lost. Today, I have everything I ever wanted: financial security, meaningful work, authentic relationships, and the knowledge that I'm surrounded by people who would be there for me whether I had millions or nothing at all. That's real magic. That's real family. That's real love.